Today, I wanted to talk about being yourself and just being yourself. It's probably one of the most common pieces of advice we give people, and I definitely give myself, is to be yourself before a first date, before an interview, before meeting new people, before a new experience, even with friends and family. Before doing something scary, it's easy to put on a mask and be someone that you're not. And I think to a certain extent you should put on a mask depending on the situation. But the advice of, in quotes, just be yourself, I think it's pretty terrible advice. Now, let me tell you why. No, not because being yourself is bad, but because nobody ever explains what that actually means. Because which version of yourself are you supposed to be in that moment when someone says be yourself? Is it the confident version? Is it the anxious version? Is it the professional version? Is it the funny version of yourself, or the version you have around your best mates or best friends, or the version of yourself when you're around your parents? Or is it the version sitting alone at 2 in the morning questioning every decision you've ever made? I definitely have a version of that. And ultimately, they're all you. And I think when I'm starting to understand is that being yourself isn't about acting the same everywhere you go. It's about constantly. Well, it's not about constantly abandoning parts of yourself because you're worried other people won't accept you, or that version of you won't be accepted. And I think I've spent a lot of my life doing exactly that. We learn pretty early how to perform, how to act a certain way in certain situations. When we're young, you quickly learn what gets approval. You also learn what makes people laugh, what gets you praised, what gets you included, what gets you judged, and all of a sudden you kind of create this conceptual world of, okay, do this, yes, do that, no, and without really noticing, you start adjusting yourself to those norms, and you could call it social norms or community norms, which I think most of them are very good. But sometimes you may become the funny one, you might be the quiet one, you might be the successful one, you might be the easygoing one, the person who never needs anything, the person who always says yes. And all of a sudden you find a version of yourself that seems to work, and then you keep using it. And I think that's great. But I think for me, I've often wanted to be the person who has things together, the reliable one, the person who can get things done, the person who anyone can talk to, can build relationships, to work hard with, take responsibility with. And those things are generally parts of me. But the problem comes when you start believing you're only allowed to be those things. Because I'm also someone who overthinks. I get anxious, I'm insecure, I care about things too much. I like to play video games, I collect cards, I love music, I love ridiculously nerdy things, and a nerd in and out, really. And I can be incredibly confident one day and completely doubt myself one day, like the next. And maybe a lot of people are the same. And sometimes I swing between both, and ultimately both versions of that is still me. I think the exhaustion of being likable is quite heavy. There's something exhausting about constantly trying to be liked in different circles and different social groups, because every interaction ultimately becomes a performance. Did I say the right thing? Was I too much? Was I too quiet? Did they think that joke was weird? Should I have said that? Should I have done that? Maybe I shouldn't talk about this because they won't understand it. Maybe I should pretend I like that. Maybe I should agree. Maybe I should disagree. Maybe I should be more impressive or show off a bit. And eventually, you're not actually connecting with anyone. You're managing the perception of you. And those two are very different things, right? Because connection requires someone to actually meet you. And they don't, or well, they can't do that if you're constantly giving them different versions of yourself or different versions of what you think they may want. And the weird thing is, this can work. People might like you, you might fit in, you might get the job, you might get the relationship, you might make the group happy, or your social group or friend group happy, or work group. But there's always this little question underneath it. Would they still like me if I stop performing? And I think that's where a lot of insecurity comes from. Because when people like a version of you, you've essentially carefully created that version for their approval, and it never really feels like yours. It feels like wearing a mask or you're in someone else's shoes. And I think being yourself doesn't mean saying everything you're thinking and that's on your mind. I think we need to separate authenticity from having absolutely no filter. Because sometimes people use, I'm just being myself, as an excuse for being inconsiderate or rude or obnoxious in certain situations. Being yourself doesn't mean saying every thought that enters your head. It doesn't mean refusing to grow. It doesn't mean never compromising for people. It doesn't mean walking into a job interview wearing pajamas because technically that's what you felt like doing that morning. We all adapt to situations, and that's normal. And ultimately, I'm going to speak very differently with my mates than I would in a business meeting. They're just different parts of me, of the same person. And I think authenticity is more about whether the values underneath those versions are consistent. Am I honest? Am I kind? Am I treating people with respect? Am I treating people the way that I would want to be treated? Am I expressing what I actually believe? Am I allowing myself to care about the things I care about? Am I making the choices because they feel right to me or because I desperately want approval? And I think that's the difference, right? You can adapt your behavior without changing who you are to your core. I think we hide things that ultimately matter the most. One of the funniest things about getting older is you start to realize how many things we stop ourselves from enjoying because we're worried. They're, I'd say, not cool enough, but maybe the correct term is not, maybe a bit childish. Sometimes that's how I feel, is that I like to collect cards and shiny cardboard, and it's a bit childish, but I enjoy it, so is it okay? I think so. I like playing video games. I like playing card games. And the perception of what the world thinks of what you're doing can impact what you ultimately want to do and doesn't allow you to be yourself. I love sports, I love going to the gym, I love to make music, and now I'm sitting in front of a camera making YouTube videos just talking about my life and lessons and life concepts because, I just enjoy it, to be honest. And there are absolutely people who will think some of those things are stupid, and that's okay. And when I was younger, that probably would have bothered me more. But now, I'd be lying if I said other people's opinion didn't bother me a little bit. But I don't think it stops me from doing what I'm doing. And I think that's, yourself coming out, and I think everyone should have a bit of that. When I was younger, I started to think, am I too old to be doing this? Should I have grown out of this or that? Will people think this is embarrassing? But I think one of the nicest things that can happen as you get older is slowly caring less. not caring about people, but caring less about being approved by everyone. Because your interests are part of what makes your life yours. You don't have to justify everything that makes you happy. You're allowed to enjoy something simply because you enjoy it. And honestly, some of the people I find most interesting are the people who are unapologetically enthusiastic about something. They just don't care. And I'm sure you've met those people who just know who they are and know what lane they're in, and it's almost attractive in a way. It's as the young people would say, there's a lot of aura behind it. And those types of people light up when they talk about whatever they're interested in. They don't care whether it's cool or not, and they love it, and that's their authentic self, and you can see it come out from them. And that's, like I said before, that's really attractive, and that's something that's really attractive about that authenticity, unapologetically loving something for the sake of loving it, and that's who they are. And I lost my train of thought now. You will lose people. This is probably the uncomfortable part of being yourself. Not everybody's going to like you. And I know that very well. And I don't think there's a way around it. And that gives me a little peace, and hopefully gives you a little peace, is that everyone faces it. There's no real way around it, so just drive on through and see where you land on the other side. You know, you can be incredibly kind, considerate, funny, successful, generous, and someone somewhere will still think you're annoying. And I'm sure there's more people in the world that think I'm annoying, more annoying than actually liking me. And it sounds a little depressing on the surface, but I think it's actually quite freeing, right? Because if being universally liked is impossible, you can stop making it your goal. You know, I spent years working in, relationship-based roles. And I've spent years, trying to nurture relationships with different types of people. And a lot of my job was literally getting to know people, getting people to like me and trust me. It was part of the job. And I think there's a value in understanding people, reading the room, being adaptable, building relationships. But outside of work, I think that's something, I think sometimes I carried that same mentality with me. How do I keep everyone happy? How do I avoid upsetting everyone? How do I make sure people think well of me? Because ultimately that's what I had to do for work, and I do enjoy it because it's a bit of a puzzle, and I enjoy understanding people and getting to know people. But at the end of the day, to answer the question, how do I make sure people think well of me? And the short answer is you can't. Sometimes being honest will disappoint someone. Sometimes not being honest will also disappoint someone. Sometimes setting a boundary will make someone angry. Sometimes it'll make them happy. Sometimes choosing something for yourself means someone else doesn't get what they wanted. Sometimes becoming more yourself means certain relationships no longer fit. Sometimes becoming more yourself means certain relationships no longer fit. And I think that's quite powerful, actually. And we hold on to what we're comfortable with, but in order to grow and to move forward, you do have to leave a part of yourself behind. And I don't think that means anyone's a bad person. Sometimes it simply means sometimes it just means that people like the version of what you were, but aren't willing to accept the version of yourself that you are today. The version who says said yes in the past says no now. The version who kept quiet in the past now speaks their mind. The person who used to seek approval now doesn't care and just does their own thing. And I think when that changes, the whole relationship of any dynamic changes too. Being yourself requires you to know yourself. And that can be challenging sometimes. That's something I'm definitely going through. And I think everyone goes through and continues to grow. And I think it's an ebb and flow, a bit of a roller coaster of a journey to ultimately find who you are. But I think that process can be a little easier when you've got a bit of a direction. And I don't think you need to find yourself once, right? I think it can be you find yourself when you're younger, that's who you are for a little bit. You find yourself in a couple of years, that's who you are. I think the version of you when you're 20 is completely different to the version you are at 30, 40, 50, 60. And then those are great milestones. And I think those are good key milestones for people. You know, the things you care about at 20 might not be the same thing you care about at 31. And I really hope I hope that the person I am at 40 is different again. At the core, I think you know your soul, the core version of you will always still be there. But hopefully you are a bit different when you get older. And I hope to continue to grow and look back at the version I am today and think, oh wow, that's proud of that version, but also happy of how far I've come. I think being yourself doesn't mean refusing to change. It means allowing yourself to change honestly. You can grow or outgrow opinions, careers, relationships, friendships, goals, even dreams. Changing your mind doesn't automatically mean you were fake before. It still was you. And maybe you learned something different. Maybe you experienced something. Maybe your priorities changed, and that's life. I think sometimes we cling on to the old version of ourselves because we've already told everyone that's who we are. You know, I'm a creative person. I don't do relationships. I hate exercise. I don't read. Or I will always work in this particular industry. Or I'm always shy. But ultimately, you're allowed to become somebody you haven't been before. You know, you don't owe it to your past self consistency. You owe your current self honestly. And a simple test, so, you know, how do you actually know whether you're being yourself? I've been thinking about 3 questions. Would I still want this if nobody knew I did it? You know, if there were no likes, no praise, no title, no money, no one to impress, would some part of me still want it? You know, for example, if no one knew I collected cards, let's say, Pokemon cards or whatever it is, would I still enjoy it? Would I still do it? I think so, because I don't really tell many people. Because it's just my own collection. I like to talk to people about it. I rarely even show my collection to friends. So that's an interesting question. And the next one I've written down here is, am I changing because I want to grow or because I want to be accepted? You know, I think that's a really key decision point, right? Are you changing because you want to be accepted in a particular group, or are you changing because you see growth in yourself? You know, you want to be fitter, more confident, better at communication, more successful. Growth says, I like who I am and I want to become better. Self-reflection says, I need to become better before I deserve to like. Self-rejection. I need to become better before I deserve to like myself. That's self-rejection. Now, the last question: who am I around the people who make me feel safest? I think that version of you is worth paying attention to. And I think we all know who that is, whoever you're most comfortable with. You wholeheartedly, I think in your heart, you know who that is. You know, it could be the version who laughs loudly, gets excited about stupid things, doesn't rehearse every sentence, doesn't have to be on edge about every conversation they have, doesn't worry about looking impressive. Maybe being yourself is allowing more of the person into the rest of your life. And I don't think yourself means knowing exactly who you are. And I don't think it means never changing. I think it means becoming less afraid of being seen. You know, letting people know what you actually care about, having opinions, setting boundaries, admitting when you're struggling, being excited about the things even if other people think they're weird. Trying something even though somebody might laugh, and understanding that not everyone has to like you. Because the alternative is spending your life building a version of yourself that everybody else can comfortably accept, and then waking up one day and realizing you don't even recognize the person you built. So maybe don't try so hard to be yourself. Just start noticing all the moments where you were tempted to abandon yourself and choose differently, a little bit at a time, because the goal isn't become somebody everybody likes. The goal is to become someone you're comfortable being when nobody is watching. Thanks for watching.